America, land of opportunity, a beacon of hope. For over a century, the American dream promised prosperity and upward mobility. But beneath this success, capitalism morphed into a beast of its own making. Unfettered greed and a widening chasm between the haves and have-nots chipped away at the American dream. Today, stagnant wages and rising income inequality paint a bleak picture. The question is, can America recover? The oil crises of the 1970s shook the American economy. Globalization exposed the underbelly of American capitalism, leading to factory closures and job losses. The 2008 financial crisis exposed deep-seated rot, eroding trust in institutions and widening the gap between rich and poor. Enter Donald Trump, who tapped into national anger and resentment. His policies exacerbated America's problems, disrupting global supply chains and raising prices. Instead of addressing root causes, Trump offered simplistic solutions and scapegoats. Under his watch, America's global standing plummeted and democratic norms were undermined. The 19th century saw the U.S. shift from agriculture to industrialization. The Industrial Revolution, fueled by natural resources and innovation, transformed the nation. Railroads connected markets, and industrial giants like Carnegie and Rockefeller rose to power. The Industrial Revolution coincided with westward expansion. Manifest destiny drove settlers west, seeking land and opportunity. This expansion brought access to resources but at a steep cost to indigenous peoples. The Gilded Age saw rapid economic growth and stark inequality. Industrialists formed monopolies, and Wall Street emerged as a financial hub. Labor unions challenged corporate power, highlighting the tensions in capitalism. The Roaring Twenties brought economic prosperity and cultural dynamism. Innovations like the automobile transformed society, but income inequality widened. The 1929 stock market crash marked the beginning of the Great Depression. Post-World War II, America experienced unprecedented economic growth. Government investments and labor unions fueled a strong middle class. This golden age masked underlying problems like racial inequality and environmental degradation. The 1929 stock market crash led to the Great Depression. The American dream became a distant mirage, and capitalism stood on trial. Roosevelt's New Deal programs aimed to provide relief, recovery, and reform. World War II transformed the U.S. into a global superpower. The war effort spurred economic growth and technological innovation. America emerged with a booming industrial base and powerful military. The Bretton Woods Agreement established the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. This gave the U.S. enormous economic and geopolitical leverage. The Bretton Woods system underpinned a period of global economic growth and stability. The aftermath of World War II saw the emergence of a new global rivalry, the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union, former allies in the fight against Nazi Germany, now found themselves locked in an ideological struggle between capitalism and communism, each seeking to expand its sphere of influence and shape the post-war world in its image. The Cold War was a multifaceted conflict, waged on multiple fronts: economic, political, military, and ideological. It was a war of words and ideas, of espionage and proxy wars, of nuclear brinkmanship and technological competition. The United States, committed to containing the spread of communism, poured billions of dollars into the Marshall Plan, a massive aid program designed to rebuild war-torn Europe and prevent the spread of Soviet influence. It also formed military alliances such as NATO to counter the Soviet threat. The Cold War had a profound impact on American society. It fueled the military-industrial complex, spurred technological advancements in areas such as aerospace and computing, and fostered a climate of fear and suspicion as the threat of nuclear annihilation loomed large. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 marked a decisive victory for the United States and its capitalist system. However, the legacy of the Cold War, with its militarism, its interventions in other countries, and its ideological rigidity, continues to shape the world today. The decades following World War II witnessed the zenith of American power and influence. The United States, riding high on its economic and military might, seemed poised to shape the world in its image. However, beneath this veneer of invincibility, cracks were beginning to appear in the American empire. The Vietnam War, a costly and divisive conflict that dragged on for over a decade, tarnished America's image as a benevolent superpower and sowed seeds of doubt about its foreign policy judgment. The Watergate scandal, which led to the resignation of President Richard Nixon, further eroded public trust in government. The oil crisis of the 1970s, triggered by an embargo by Arab oil-producing nations, exposed the vulnerabilities of the American economy, which had become increasingly reliant on foreign oil. The crisis led to soaring inflation, gas shortages, and a sense that America's days of unchallenged economic dominance might be numbered. The Iranian Revolution of 1979, which overthrew the pro-Western Shah and established an Islamic Republic, was another blow to American prestige and influence in the Middle East, a region of vital strategic importance. These events, along with growing economic competition from Japan and other rising powers, signaled that the post-World War II order, with the United States at its helm, was undergoing a period of profound change and uncertainty. The 1970s marked a turning point for the American economy. Oil shocks in 1973 and 1979 sent shockwaves through the American economy. Prices skyrocketed, leading to long lines at gas stations. Stagflation became the new reality. Workers faced shrinking paychecks and rising unemployment. Globalization led to outsourcing and factory closures. Companies shifted production overseas. This devastated American manufacturing communities. The social contract began to fray. The gap between rich and poor widened. The American dream felt exclusive to the privileged few. As the 20th century drew to a close, a new economic power was emerging on the world stage: China. After decades of communist rule and relative isolation, China embarked on a path of economic liberalization and integration into the global economy. Its vast population, its hunger for growth, and its willingness to embrace market reforms made it an economic powerhouse in the making. China's ascent was nothing short of meteoric. Factories sprang up across the country, churning out goods for export at a dizzying pace. Its economy grew at an average rate of 10% per year, lifting millions out of poverty and transforming the nation into the world's second-largest economy. This economic miracle, however, was not without its costs. China's rise came at the expense of American jobs and industries, its lax labor and environmental regulations, its willingness to manipulate its currency, and its theft of intellectual property gave it an unfair advantage in the global marketplace, according to critics. The United States, accustomed to being the world's sole economic superpower, now faced a formidable competitor, one that challenged its economic dominance, its technological prowess, and its geopolitical influence. The relationship between the two countries, once characterized by cautious engagement, became increasingly fraught with tension and mistrust. The financial crisis of 2008 was a watershed moment in American history, a stark reminder that even the most seemingly robust economies are vulnerable to excesses, greed, and a lack of oversight. What began as a crisis in the American housing market, fueled by subprime mortgages and complex financial instruments, quickly morphed into a global financial meltdown, threatening to bring the entire system crashing down. The roots of the crisis lay in a toxic combination of factors. Deregulation of the financial industry, which allowed banks to engage in risky lending practices. The rise of complex financial products such as mortgage-backed securities that were poorly understood and inadequately regulated. And a culture of greed and recklessness on Wall Street, where profits were prized above all else. When the housing bubble burst, sending home prices plummeting, the house of cards collapsed. Banks, saddled with toxic assets, faced collapse. Credit markets froze, businesses struggled to obtain loans, and the global economy teetered on the brink of a depression. The government, in an effort to avert disaster, bailed out banks and financial institutions deemed too big to fail, using taxpayer money to prop up a system that had brought the country to its knees. The bailout, while necessary to prevent a complete economic collapse, fueled public anger and resentment, as ordinary Americans struggled to make ends meet while Wall Street executives walked away with their fortunes intact. The aftermath of the financial crisis exposed the deep fissures that had been growing in American society for decades. The gap between the rich and the poor, already at alarming levels, widened into a chasm. The top 1% of earners captured a disproportionate share of the economic gains, while the middle class continued to shrink, its prospects dimming with each passing year. This growing inequality fueled a sense of resentment and injustice, a feeling that the system was rigged against ordinary Americans. Trust in institutions, from the government to big business to the media, plummeted as people felt increasingly disillusioned and disconnected from the political process. Political polarization, already on the rise, intensified. The two major political parties, once representing a spectrum of views, became increasingly entrenched in their ideological corners, unwilling or unable to find common ground. The rise of social media, while connecting people in new ways, also created echo chambers, where people were exposed only to information that confirmed their existing biases. This toxic brew of inequality, polarization, and distrust created a fertile breeding ground for demagoguery and extremism. The American body politic, weakened from within, became vulnerable to those who sought to exploit its divisions for their own gain. The election of Donald Trump in 2016 was a seismic event in American history, a culmination of the economic, social, and political trends that had been reshaping the nation for decades. Trump, a billionaire businessman with no prior political experience, tapped into a deep well of anger, resentment, and nostalgia among a segment of the population that felt left behind by globalization, ignored by the political establishment, and threatened by demographic and cultural changes. His campaign promises to make America great again, to bring back jobs, to build a wall on the border with Mexico, and to put America first resonated with those who yearned for a simpler time, when America stood unchallenged as the world's dominant power, when manufacturing jobs were plentiful, and when white Americans were the undisputed majority. Trump's victory was a rejection of the status quo, a repudiation of the political establishment, and a sign that the American experiment in democracy was facing its most severe test in generations. His presidency, marked by chaos, division, and attacks on democratic norms, would further accelerate America's decline on the world stage, leaving the nation more divided, more isolated, and more uncertain of its place in the world than at any time in recent memory. The American dream, once a beacon of hope, is now a source of disillusionment for many. The foundation of American capitalism is crumbling under staggering inequality. The gap between the haves and have-nots threatens the nation's ideals. Statistics paint a grim picture. The richest 1% own more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. This concentration of wealth reflects a system rigged to benefit the few. Wages stagnate while the cost of living skyrockets. This inequality breeds social ills and erodes social mobility. It traps generations in cycles of poverty and despair. It fuels crime and undermines trust in institutions. The American dream now feels like a cruel illusion. The consequences threaten the nation's economic well-being and social fabric. When upward mobility seems like a myth, unrest and resentment grow. Section 2, Drowning in Debt, From Individuals to a Nation on the Brink. The American dream, for many, has become a debt-fueled nightmare. Americans are drowning in debt, from student loans to medical bills. This crisis is systemic, not just personal. Student loan debt has reached $1.7 trillion. Young Americans start their lives saddled with debt, delaying homeownership and family life. The cost of education has spiraled out of control. The healthcare system drives many into debt. Medical bills are a leading cause of bankruptcy. Families are trapped in cycles of debt. Even with insurance, high deductibles burden many. This debt burden stifles economic growth. It exacerbates inequality and stifles growth. Those at the bottom are disproportionately burdened. The social safety net is undermined. Section 3. The Housing Crisis, A Roof Overhead, a Distant Dream. The American dream has always included the aspiration of owning a home, a place to call one's own, a symbol of security and achievement. However, for a growing number of Americans, this dream is slipping out of reach. As the housing crisis pushes homeownership further into the realm of fantasy for many, the cost of housing has skyrocketed in recent years, driven by a combination of factors, including low interest rates, limited supply, and speculative investment. In many cities, wages have not kept pace with rising housing costs. making it nearly impossible for many, especially essential workers and young families, to afford even a modest apartment, let alone a house. This affordability crisis has forced many to make impossible choices, move further away from jobs and support networks, live in overcrowded or unsafe conditions, or forego other essentials, such as healthcare or education, to keep a roof over their heads. The stress and instability of housing insecurity have a ripple effect, impacting everything from physical and mental health to educational outcomes and economic mobility. The crisis is particularly acute for marginalized communities, who often face systemic barriers to housing, such as discrimination, predatory lending practices, and a lack of affordable housing options in their neighborhoods. The legacy of redlining, a discriminatory practice that denied mortgages and other financial services to residents of predominantly black and brown neighborhoods, continues to cast a long shadow on the housing market, perpetuating racial wealth gaps and housing disparities. Section 4. The Automation Anxiety, when robots steal your job and your future. Automation and AI are transforming workplaces, promising productivity but also causing job displacement. Jobs once safe, like truck driving and data entry, are now at risk. Even white-collar jobs like legal research and financial analysis face automation threats. Policymakers must balance automation's benefits with its challenges. Investing in education and training is crucial for adapting to this new era. As American capitalism grapples with its demons, many look towards Silicon Valley, the epicenter of technological innovation, for salvation. Tech optimists argue that the very forces that have disrupted traditional industries and exacerbated inequality, automation, artificial intelligence, the gig economy, also hold the key to a more prosperous and equitable future. They point to the potential of AI to revolutionize healthcare, education, and transportation, making these essential services more accessible and affordable for all. They envision a future where automation frees workers from drudgery, allowing them to pursue more creative and fulfilling endeavors. They believe that the gig economy, while not without its flaws, offers workers flexibility and opportunities for entrepreneurship. Silicon Valley, with its entrepreneurial spirit, its venture capital funding, and its track record of disrupting entire industries, is seen as the engine that will drive this technological revolution. Companies like Tesla, Google, and Amazon are not just businesses. They are seen as agents of change, pushing the boundaries of what's possible and creating entirely new sectors of the economy. However, this techno-utopian vision is not without its skeptics. Critics argue that Silicon Valley's brand of solutionism often prioritizes profit over people, that its innovations often exacerbate existing inequalities, and that its reliance on data collection and surveillance raises serious privacy concerns. The question remains, can Silicon Valley, with its focus on disruption and its libertarian ethos, truly address the systemic problems plaguing American capitalism, or will it simply create new ones? Section 2. The Reform Imperative. Addressing the roots of discontent. The challenges facing American capitalism cannot be solved by technological innovation alone. Addressing the deep-seated problems of inequality, debt, and erosion of trust requires a fundamental rethinking of the social contract, a recognition that a system that prioritizes short-term profits over long-term sustainability is ultimately unsustainable. Reformers argue for a multi-pronged approach, starting with addressing the issue of income inequality. This includes raising the minimum wage, strengthening unions, making the tax code more progressive, and investing in education and job training programs that provide opportunities for upward mobility. Tackling the debt crisis requires addressing the root causes, such as the soaring cost of healthcare and education. This could involve exploring universal healthcare options, making college more affordable, and providing debt relief to those struggling under the weight of student loans. Restoring trust in institutions requires addressing the corrosive influence of money in politics, reforming campaign finance laws, and ensuring that the political system is more responsive to the needs of ordinary citizens rather than special interests. It also means addressing issues of systemic racism and discrimination that continue to plague American society, creating an uneven playing field and perpetuating cycles of poverty and inequality. These reforms will not be easy to achieve. They will require challenging entrenched interests, overcoming partisan gridlock, and mobilizing a citizenry that has become increasingly disillusioned with the political process. However, the alternative, a continued slide towards greater inequality, instability, and social unrest, is simply unacceptable. Section 3. The Global Reckoning, American Exceptionalism, or A Cautionary Tale. The challenges facing American capitalism are not unique. Rising inequality, stagnant wages, technological disruption, political polarization, and a loss of faith in institutions. The American experience, once a model for the world, is now seen as a cautionary tale. Populism and nationalism rise in reaction to these anxieties. The world is watching. Can the U.S. reform and reclaim its position, or will it continue to decline? The future of American capitalism hangs in the balance. The choices made will shape the world to come. Section 1. The Crumbling Facade, an Empire in Decline. The American experiment, once a beacon of hope for the world, is now a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that empires, no matter how mighty, are not immune to the forces of history. The very forces that propelled America to its heights, innovation, entrepreneurial spirit, a belief in boundless opportunity, have been warped and distorted, leaving the nation grappling with the consequences of its own success. The American dream, once a promise whispered from generation to generation, now rings hollow for far too many. The gap between the haves and have-nots has become an unbridgeable chasm, a testament to a system that has lost its way, prioritizing corporate profits and the accumulation of wealth over the well-being of its citizens. The warning signs have been flashing for decades. The decline of manufacturing, the rise of inequality, the erosion of the middle class, the crushing burden of debt, the hollowing out of democracy itself. Yet those in power, blinded by ideology or beholden to special interests, have failed to heed the warnings, choosing instead to double down on the very policies that have brought the nation to this precipice. The myth of American exceptionalism, the belief that the United States is somehow immune to the forces that have toppled empires throughout history, has been shattered. The cracks in the facade are too deep, the rot too pervasive, to ignore any longer. The question is no longer whether America is in decline, but whether it can find the will to change course before it's too late. Section 2. A Crossroads for Capitalism, Renewal or Ruin. The crisis facing American capitalism is not merely an American problem, it is a global one. As the world's leading economic and military power, America's fate is inextricably intertwined with that of the global community. The choices made in Washington, in boardrooms, and in the streets will have ripple effects that will be felt for generations to come. The challenge before us is not to abandon capitalism, but to reclaim it from those who have hijacked it for their own narrow interests. It is to build an economy that works for everyone, not just the privileged few. It is to create a system that values sustainability over short-term profits, that prioritizes the well-being of people and the planet over the endless accumulation of wealth. This will require a fundamental shift in values, a rejection of the greed and individualism that have come to define our age. It will demand a renewed commitment to the common good, a recognition that we are all interconnected and that our fates are intertwined. It will necessitate a willingness to challenge the powerful, to hold them accountable for their actions, and to demand a more just and equitable society. The path forward will not be easy. It will require courage, compassion, and an unwavering belief in the possibility of a better future. The time for complacency is over. The time for action is now. The fate of American capitalism, and perhaps the world as we know it, hangs in the balance.